In 1943, Sir Albert Howard stood in a field outside Indore, India, and watched a pile of straw, cow dung, and kitchen scraps transform into dark, crumbling soil in 90 days. No electricity, no machinery, no plastic tumbler drum mounted on a steel frame, just organic waste, open air, and time. The compost he produced was so rich in humic acid that it outperformed every synthetic fertilizer the British colonial government had shipped to India that decade. His method cost nothing. The materials were already on the ground, waiting to rot. That was over 80 years ago. And here is what most people do not realize. Howard was not inventing something new. He was documenting what Indian farmers had been doing for centuries, what Chinese rice paddy cultivators had been doing for millennia before that, what Mesopotamian farmers carved into clay tablets in 2300 BC, the oldest written reference to composting ever found, and what the forest floor beneath your feet is doing right now, at this very moment, without anyone turning it, spinning it, or spending $200 on a rotating plastic barrel to help it along. The global fertilizer industry generates over $200 billion in revenue every single year. The composting equipment market adds another $2 billion on top of that. And the single most effective composting method ever validated by modern soil science, the one that produces the richest, most biologically diverse humus, is the one that costs you exactly $0 and requires you to do almost nothing. Today, we are opening a vault that connects ancient Mesopotamian agriculture to cutting-edge soil microbiology to the backyard you have been ignoring all winter. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly how to build a composting system that outperforms expensive tumbler bins using nothing but waste you already throw away. The story of composting begins not in a garden center, but in the floodplains of ancient Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern Iraq. Around 2300 BC, during the reign of King Sargon of the Akkadian Empire, scribes carved instructions onto clay tablets describing how to layer animal dung with crop residue and allow it to decompose before spreading it on fields. This was not casual advice, it was state agricultural policy. The Akkadians understood that the fertility of their empire depended on returning organic matter to the soil. When they stopped doing it, their fields turned to salt, and their civilization collapsed. 3,000 miles to the east, Chinese farmers were independently perfecting the same principle. First century BC texts from the Han Dynasty describe enriching soil with cooked bones, silkworm debris, and composted manure. The agronomist Fan Shengqi documented seed balls, seeds wrapped in clay and compostable material that provided nutrients as the seedling germinated. Chinese composting practices were so effective that when the British soil physicist F.H. King traveled to China in 1909, he found farms that had been continuously cultivated for 4,000 years without any loss of fertility, 4,000 years, on the same soil. The book he wrote about it, Farmers of 40 Centuries, would later inspire the entire modern organic movement. In ancient Rome, the writer Columella described layering vegetable waste, manure, and ash in pits and letting it decompose. The Greek philosopher Xenophon advised farmers to gather weeds and rot them in water to create a liquid manure. In the Americas, the Aztecs built an entire agricultural system on composted human waste, growing 4 crops a year on artificial islands called chinampas, enough to feed 2/3 of a city of 200,000 people. Native Americans buried fish beneath their seed plantings. In Egypt, Cleopatra enacted laws protecting earthworms, banning their export under penalty of death, because she understood that worms were the engines of soil fertility. This is not folklore. This is convergent biology, the same microbial truth discovered independently on every inhabited continent through observation, necessity, and generational wisdom. And in every single one of these traditions, the method was the same. Pile organic matter, keep it moist, let it sit. No one was spinning anything. Now, let us talk about what actually happens inside a compost pile at the molecular level, because the science explains why lazy composting works so well, and why expensive tumblers can actually make it worse. Composting is a biological relay race. It begins with mesophilic bacteria, organisms that thrive between 20 and 45 degrees Celsius. They colonize fresh organic waste within hours, breaking down simple sugars, starches, and amino acids. Their metabolic activity generates heat, and the pile's internal temperature rises. If conditions are right, the pile transitions into its thermophilic phase, reaching temperatures between 55 and 70 degrees Celsius. Thermophilic microbes take over, degrading cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, the tough structural polymers that make up plant cell walls. Species like Bacillus and Thermoactinomyces lead this assault, joined by cellulolytic fungi from genera like Aspergillus and Trichoderma that secrete extracellular enzymes capable of dismantling lignocellulose. But here is the critical distinction that changes everything. After the thermophilic phase ends, the pile enters its maturation stage. Temperatures drop, and now a completely different community of organisms moves in. Saprophytic fungi, actinomycetes, and, crucially, earthworms. These organisms do not just decompose organic matter, they transform it. They synthesize humic acid and fulvic acid, the stable, long-chain carbon molecules that give finished compost its dark color, its water retention capacity, and its ability to feed plants for months rather than days. A 2024 study published in Frontiers in Microbiology demonstrated that the humification process, the creation of these stable humic substances, is driven by complex bacterial and fungal communities working in cross-domain networks. The more diverse the microbial community, the higher the humic acid content, and the better the final compost. And this is where the tumbler fails. A sealed plastic drum, elevated off the ground, cannot host earthworms. If worms enter a tumbler and the temperature spikes during the thermophilic phase, they cannot escape. They die. The drum also restricts airflow compared to an open pile. To end its limited volume, typically 4 to 15 cubic feet, often cannot sustain the thermophilic temperatures that a larger static pile achieves naturally. In 2011, the UK magazine Which? Gardening ran a controlled comparison. 5 well-filled compost tumblers, turned 3 times per week, against a traditional compost heap of the same volume, turned just once a week. The heap produced usable compost in roughly 10 weeks. The tumblers took a full month longer. Let that sink in for a moment. The device marketed as faster was measurably slower. The device sold as more efficient excluded the very organisms most responsible for producing high-quality humus. And the method that outperformed it, the pile on the ground, turned occasionally, is the direct descendant of what Akkadian farmers were doing 4,000 years ago. Modern validation of cold composting extends well beyond a single magazine test. Research from the Bernalillo County Extension in New Mexico confirmed that organic material in a static pile decomposes effectively without turning, as long as coarse materials maintain airflow and moisture stays around 50%. This static, no-turn decomposition mimics the natural process on a moist forest floor, the same process that has been building topsoil on this planet for roughly 450 million years, since the first land plants began to decay. The composting literature from Cornell University, Penn State, and the University of Vermont consistently shows that cold composting, while slower than actively managed hot composting, produces compost with greater microbial diversity, higher earthworm activity, and more stable humic substances. The trade-off is time, 6 to 12 months instead of 2 to 3 months. But the trade-off is not quality. The quality is often superior. So why does almost every gardening website, every hardware store display, and every YouTube ad push you toward a $150 to $300 tumbler bin instead of telling you to just make a pile? The answer is not a conspiracy. It is something more ordinary and honestly more frustrating: economics. You cannot patent a pile of leaves. You cannot patent the act of letting organic matter sit on the ground and rot. You cannot build a subscription business around gravity and time. And you certainly cannot justify a $200 retail price on a product when the active process, microbial decomposition, happens for free in any pile of organic matter, anywhere on Earth, without human intervention. The global fertilizer market exceeds $200 billion annually. The composting equipment segment, bins, tumblers, accelerators, thermometers, aerators, starter cultures, adds billions more. These are real companies with real shareholders and real marketing budgets. And the single most threatening idea to their revenue model is the oldest idea in agriculture, that soil feeds itself if you let it. The suppression is not a shadowy conspiracy. It is how markets work. Search for how to compost online, And the first page of results will be dominated by product reviews, affiliate links, and sponsored content from equipment manufacturers. The free method, make a pile, keep it moist, wait, gets buried beneath page after page of Best Compost Tumbler 2026 listicles. Gardening influencers receive free products from brands in exchange for favorable reviews. Home improvement television shows feature sleek tumbler setups because someone paid for the product placement. The language itself has been engineered. Composting system implies you need a system. Compost starter implies the process will not start without a purchased additive. Even the phrase compost bin trains your brain to think a bin is a prerequisite. None of this is illegal. None of it is coordinated in a dark boardroom. It is simply how $200 billion industries protect themselves, by making the free alternative invisible. Now, to be fair, tumbler bins do have legitimate advantages. They deter rodents effectively. Sealed drums keep rats out of kitchen scraps. They are tidier, which matters in dense suburban neighborhoods with restrictive HOA rules. And for people with back injuries, a tumbler on a crank eliminates the need to bend and fork through a pile. These are real benefits for specific situations. But for 80 to 90% of home gardeners, people with a backyard, some leaves, and kitchen scraps, the tumbler is solving a problem that does not exist while creating problems that do: insufficient volume, excluded earthworms, and a slower decomposition timeline. Here is the complete method. It costs nothing. It takes 5 minutes to set up, and it will produce compost that is biologically superior to anything a tumbler can generate. Step 1. Choose a spot. Pick a level area of bare ground in a shaded or partially shaded corner of your yard. Direct ground contact is essential. This is how earthworms, fungi, and beneficial microbes colonize your pile from below. A tumbler elevated on a metal frame severs this connection entirely. Step 2. Build your base layer. Lay down roughly 15 to 20 centimeters of coarse brown material, dry leaves, small twigs, straw, or shredded cardboard. This creates air channels at the bottom of the pile and prevents compaction. Step 3. Add your greens and browns. Layer kitchen scraps, vegetable peels, coffee grounds, crushed eggshells, fruit cores, with dry material at a rough ratio of 1 part green to 2 parts brown by volume. You do not need to measure precisely. If the pile smells, add more browns. If it looks bone dry and nothing is happening, add water. That is the entire calibration method. Step 4. Do almost nothing. To add scraps as they accumulate, toss a handful of dry leaves or shredded newspaper on top each time to cover food waste and discourage flies. If you feel energetic once a month, push a garden fork into the pile in a few spots and wiggle it to introduce air. This is optional. The coarse base layer and the natural activity of earthworms handle most of the aeration. Step 5. Wait. In warm climates, you will have usable compost in 4 to 6 months. In temperate climates, expect 6 to 12 months. In cold climates, the pile slows over winter and reactivates in spring. You will know it is ready when the bottom of the pile is dark brown to black, crumbly, smells like forest floor, and the original materials are unrecognizable. Your total cost, $0. A comparable tumbler bin runs $80 to $300 depending on the model. A bag of commercial compost at the garden center, 40 liters, costs $5 to $12 and contains a fraction of the microbial life that your homemade version will deliver. A full season of synthetic fertilizer for a modest garden runs $50 to $150 and adds nothing to soil structure, nothing to microbial diversity, and nothing to the long-term health of the ground beneath your feet. That patch of yard you have been ignoring, the corner where leaves pile up every autumn and nobody rakes, could be producing black gold by next spring. Akkadian scribes knew this. Chinese rice farmers knew this. Roman agronomists knew this. Sir Albert Howard traveled halfway around the world to learn it from Indian villagers, then spent the rest of his life trying to convince the industrialized West to remember it. Your great-grandparents almost certainly knew it too. The soil does not need a product. It needs its own deadback. Every share puts a crack in the wall built around knowledge that was never anyone's to lock away. If this changed how you think about that pile of leaves in your yard, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss what we uncover next. Every like tells the algorithm this matters more than another ad. Stay curious, stay self-reliant. I will see you in the next one.